Hello, my beloved friend. Welcome. I'm so happy you have chosen to spend some peaceful time with me tonight. Wherever you are in the world, whether it is day or night, I hope you feel safe, comfortable, and ready to rest. Maybe you are lying in bed, wrapped in a soft blanket. Perhaps you are sitting quietly, enjoying a moment to yourself. No matter where you are, I invite you to take a deep breath now. Inhale slowly and gently, then exhale just as softly. Let your body begin to relax as you listen to this calm and soothing story from the Bible. If you enjoy these quiet moments and peaceful stories, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might appreciate a gentle bedtime story. Your kindness and support help me continue to bring stories that soothe the soul and quiet the mind. Tonight's story is one of the most well-known and moving stories from the Old Testament. It tells of a man named David, a king chosen by God to lead his people, and a woman named Bathsheba. This story shows us the power of human weakness, the weight of choices, and the possibility of forgiveness and grace. Let us begin this journey slowly and gently. Long ago, in the ancient land of Israel, there was a young shepherd boy named David. He spent many days and nights in the quiet fields, caring for his sheep. The hills were his home, and the stars his companions. David loved the Lord with all his heart and often sang songs of praise and trust. His music was beautiful, and it touched the hearts of all who heard it. God saw something special in David's heart. Even though he was just a boy, God chose him to be king of Israel. David was anointed by the prophet Samuel, a sign that God had picked him to lead his people. David grew from a humble shepherd into a strong and wise king. He led Israel through many battles, defeating their enemies and bringing peace to the land. Jerusalem became his city, and there he built a palace, a home befitting a king. The people loved David because he was brave and just, and he kept his heart close to God. But even the greatest king has moments when he falters. One spring, when the air was soft and warm, King David's army went to war against the Ammonites. The army was led by Joab, David's trusted commander. They marched out from the city and camped near Rabbah, a fortified city held by Israel's enemies. Usually David would have gone with them, but this time he stayed behind in Jerusalem. In the evenings, David would sometimes walk on the flat roof of his palace. From there, he could see the whole city spread beneath him, with its winding streets and houses built close together. The light of the setting sun bathed the city in a golden glow. The breeze was gentle, and the sounds of the city began to fade as people settled in for the night. One evening, as David stood on the roof, his eyes fell on a woman in the distance. She was bathing in the open air, in her own courtyard, unaware of the king's gaze. She was very beautiful. The fading sunlight caught the curve of her neck and the shine of her skin. David's heart was stirred by her beauty in a way he had not expected. Her name was Bathsheba. Bathsheba was married to Uriah the Hittite, one of David's loyal soldiers, who was away at war with Joab's army. She was a woman of grace and dignity, faithful to her husband. Yet David's eyes and thoughts did not turn away. Instead, his desire grew. he sent a messenger to find out about her. The messenger returned with news. She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. David was not deterred by this. He sent messengers to bring Bathsheba to him. When Bathsheba came, she could not refuse the king's summons. It was not something a woman could easily say no to in those days. That night, David and Bathsheba were together. Sometime later, Bathsheba sent a message to the palace. She was with child. David's heart must have been filled with many emotions. He knew the child could not be Uriah's, since Uriah was still away at war. The secret was now out in the open. David tried to hide what had happened. He sent for Uriah and asked him how the battle was going. Then he said, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." David hoped that Uriah would go home to his wife and spend the night with her, so that the child might be thought to be his. But Uriah was a man of honor. He refused to enjoy the comforts of home while his brothers were still in battle. Instead of going home, Uriah slept at the entrance of the palace with the other servants. David invited Uriah to eat and drink with him and made him drunk, hoping this time he would go home. But Uriah still did not. David's heart must have been troubled deeply. Finally, David sent Uriah back to the battle with a secret letter for Joab, the commander. In the letter, David instructed Joab to put Uriah in the fiercest part of the fighting and then pull back so Uriah would be killed. Joab did as he was told. Uriah died in battle. Bathsheba mourned her husband's death, and David comforted her. Soon, Bathsheba became David's wife and bore him a son. But God was not pleased with David's actions. God saw everything. The story of David and Bathsheba is one of sorrow and repentance, and it shows us that even kings can make mistakes, but God's grace is always near. This is where our story will continue. After Bathsheba gave birth to her son, King David thought the matter was settled. He had taken Bathsheba into his home and made her his wife. The child was David's, and life seemed to return to a quiet rhythm in the palace. But deep within David's heart, a weight remained. He had done wrong, and though he tried to hide it from others, God's eyes saw all. One day, God sent a prophet to David. His name was Nathan. Nathan was a man who spoke God's words clearly, even when they were hard to hear. The prophet came quietly to the palace and asked to speak with the king. David welcomed Nathan with respect. Nathan sat down and told David a story. There were two men in a city, Nathan began gently. One was rich and had many flocks and herds. The other was poor and had nothing but one little lamb he had bought and raised like a daughter. This lamb ate from his plate and slept in his arms. The poor man loved this lamb very much. Now, the rich man had many sheep and cattle, but when a visitor came to him, instead of taking from his own animals, he took the poor man's only lamb and prepared it for the guest. David listened carefully. His eyes narrowed. "That rich man deserves to die," he said, anger rising in his voice. "He must make restitution for the lamb 4 times over, because he showed no pity." Then Nathan looked directly at David and said, "You are the man." David's face grew still. The story was no longer about another man, but about him. Nathan continued, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. You have despised the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes. You have taken Uriah's wife to be your own and have killed Uriah by sending him to die in battle. Now, the sword will never depart from your house, because you have despised me and taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." David felt a deep sadness and shame rise up within him. He understood that he had sinned against God, against Uriah, and against Bathsheba. He bowed his head and said quietly, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan replied, "The Lord also has taken away your sin. You shall not die. But because of what you have done, the child born to you must die." David mourned deeply for the child. He fasted and prayed, hoping the Lord would have mercy. The servants watched as David moved quietly through the palace, his heart heavy with sorrow. After 7 days, the child grew weak and died. David's grief was deep and profound, but even in his sorrow, he found hope. The Lord comforted him, and after the child died, David rose and went to Bathsheba. She bore him another son, and they named him Solomon. God loved Solomon, and later called him Jedidiah, which means beloved of the Lord. Despite David's mistakes and the pain that followed, God's grace was still with him. David remained a man after God's own heart. Life in Jerusalem continued. David ruled as king, and the kingdom grew stronger. Yet the consequences of David's actions were felt for many years. The sword that Nathan spoke of came as a warning of struggles yet to come in David's family. But in the quiet moments, David sang songs of repentance and praise. He wrote many psalms that remind us how God is merciful and forgiving. Through all his trials, David's faith never wavered. The story of David and Bathsheba teaches us that no one is perfect. Even the greatest kings can fall, but God's love and forgiveness are always near for those who turn to him with a humble heart. After the death of their first child, life in King David's palace gradually moved forward. Though grief still lingered in quiet moments, David and Bathsheba continued their life together. Bathsheba gave birth to another son, Solomon, who would grow to be a wise and beloved king. The name Solomon means peace, and it was a name full of hope for the future. But the story of David and Bathsheba did not end simply with the birth of Solomon. The choices David had made sent ripples through the kingdom of Israel, affecting his family and the people he ruled for many years to come. David's heart was often heavy as he reflected on his mistakes. Though he was a man after God's own heart, David was not perfect. His life was marked by great victories and painful lessons. Yet, through it all, God's presence never left him. In the years following, David continued to lead Israel with strength and wisdom. He wrote many songs and prayers, some filled with joy and thanksgiving, others with sorrow and repentance. These songs, known as the Psalms, still comfort people around the world today. They remind us that no matter how far we fall, we can always seek God's mercy and love. David's family life, however, was complicated and sometimes troubled. His sons grew up in the royal palace, each with their own dreams and struggles. Some of his children faced difficult challenges, and the kingdom itself was not always peaceful. The sword Nathan had spoken of seemed to hang over David's house, a reminder of the consequences of his actions. One of David's sons, Absalom, became especially well known. He was handsome and charming, but he carried anger deep in his heart. Absalom rebelled against his father and caused much strife in the kingdom. This conflict brought sadness to David and his people. Despite these challenges, David remained a devoted servant of God. He sought to live with humility and to ask for forgiveness when he failed. The story of his relationship with Bathsheba is part of the larger story of his life, a story of a man who made mistakes but never gave up on God. Bathsheba herself became an important figure in Israel's history. She was not only the mother of Solomon, but also played a role in the royal court. When David grew older, Bathsheba spoke wisely and helped guide decisions for the kingdom. She loved her son and wished for him to succeed his father as king. The birth of Solomon marked a turning point. God had chosen Solomon to be a king who would build the great temple in Jerusalem, a house dedicated to worshipping God. Solomon's wisdom became famous throughout the land, and his reign brought peace and prosperity to Israel. Looking back, the story of David and Bathsheba reminds us that even when we make wrong choices, there is hope for forgiveness and new beginnings. David's life shows us that God's grace is greater than our mistakes. The love and faithfulness of God remain constant, even in the face of human weakness. This truth can bring comfort and peace as we face our own struggles and seek to live with kindness and honesty. As we rest in this quiet moment, let us remember the lessons of this story: to be humble, to seek forgiveness, and to trust in the loving care of God. No matter what has happened, God's mercy is always near, waiting to embrace us with peace. The years that followed the birth of Solomon were filled with many changes for King David and for the kingdom of Israel. Though Solomon was still a child, the promise of his future was clear. He was a symbol of hope and new beginnings after a time of sorrow and hardship. David's heart was often heavy as he looked back on the choices he had made. Though he had been chosen by God and anointed as king, he knew that he had made mistakes that affected not only his own life, but the lives of those around him. His story was one of both great triumph and deep regret. In the quiet moments of the palace, David would often seek the Lord in prayer and song. He poured out his heart in the Psalms, writing words of praise, confession, and longing. These psalms were not just for David alone. They were words of comfort and hope that would one day reach countless others across the ages. David's relationship with Bathsheba grew over the years. Bathsheba, once a woman who had faced loss and sorrow, became a strong and respected queen. She stood beside David during times of joy and times of difficulty. Her wisdom and grace were admired by many in the kingdom. Together, they navigated the challenges of court life and family. The palace was filled with the sounds of children growing up, servants working quietly, and the gentle rhythms of daily life in the royal household. Yet beneath the surface, there were struggles that would touch every member of David's family. One of David's sons, Absalom, became a source of great concern. Handsome and charismatic, Absalom won the hearts of many people in Israel. However, he carried anger in his heart especially toward his father. This anger would lead to rebellion and conflict within the kingdom. David's pain as a father was deep. He loved his children, but he also faced the reality that his family was not perfect. The sword Nathan had spoken of, the sword that would never depart from his house, was a reminder of the lasting consequences of sin and broken choices. Yet even in these moments of sorrow and challenge, David's faith remained steadfast. He continued to seek God's guidance and mercy. He was a man who understood the depths of human weakness, but also the boundless reach of God's grace. Bathsheba's role in the royal family expanded as well. She was not only the mother of Solomon, but also an advisor to David in his later years. Her voice was one of wisdom and kindness, offering guidance in matters of the kingdom. When David grew old and his health began to fail, there was a question of who would succeed him as king. Bathsheba, knowing the importance of this decision, spoke to the king on behalf of their son Solomon. She reminded David of God's promise and the future that Solomon could bring to Israel. David listened carefully and blessed Solomon. He prayed that Solomon would be a wise and just ruler, one who would build the temple and lead the people in the ways of the Lord. This moment marked a turning point. Solomon's rise to the throne would bring peace and prosperity to the land, fulfilling the hope that had been kindled years before. Looking back on the entire story of David and Bathsheba, we see a tale that is full of complexity of human desire and divine forgiveness, of sin and grace. David was a man who stumbled, but he also repented. Bathsheba was a woman who faced great loss, but became a queen who helped shape the future of Israel. Their story reminds us that no matter how far we fall, God's love and mercy are always near. It teaches us about the power of forgiveness, the importance of humility, and the hope that comes from trusting in God's plan. As you rest now, let these truths settle gently in your heart. Know that you are loved, and that no mistake is too great for God's forgiveness. Like David, we can all turn back to God with a humble spirit, finding peace and new beginnings. The story of David and Bathsheba continues to teach us, even now, about the depths of human experience and the unending grace of God. As the days passed and the years unfolded like a gentle river, David continued to lead the people of Israel. Though his heart carried the weight of past mistakes, he remained a king after God's own heart. His reign was marked by victories, by peace, and by the deep love he had for his people. Yet the consequences of his actions with Bathsheba and Uriah still echoed softly but steadily through his life. The house of David was no longer free from trouble, and even the closest families face storms that test their strength. One of these storms came in the form of family conflict. David's son Amnon, the firstborn, committed a terrible wrong against his half-sister Tamar. Amnon's actions caused great pain in the family and deep sorrow in David's heart. Though David was king, he struggled with how to respond, feeling the heaviness of broken relationships and lost trust. David's other son, Absalom, was Tamar's full brother. When he learned of what Amnon had done, his anger grew fierce. He waited and planned quietly for 2 years. Finally, he took revenge by having Amnon killed. This act of vengeance set in motion a rebellion that would shake the kingdom to its core. Absalom fled to Geshur to escape punishment. David's heart was torn. As a father, he longed for his son's return, but as king, he faced the reality of rebellion and unrest. Despite the pain, David continued to trust in the Lord's guidance. He prayed for peace and for the restoration of his family. He wrote psalms that reflected both his sorrow and his hope, reminding himself and the people that God's mercy is new every morning. Meanwhile, Solomon, the son born to David and Bathsheba after the death of their first child, grew quietly in the palace. He was a boy full of promise and wisdom, though still young and gentle. David loved Solomon dearly and dreamed of the great things God had planned for him. When the time came for David to prepare for his departure from this life, he called his sons to his side. He gave Solomon the charge to build the temple for the Lord, a holy place where God's presence would dwell among his people forever. David's words were full of encouragement and blessing. He reminded Solomon to be strong and courageous, to follow God's commands, and to seek wisdom above all else. Solomon listened carefully. He knew the importance of his father's charge. He promised to serve God faithfully and to honor the legacy of David's reign. David's life, full of joy and sorrow, ended quietly. He rested with his ancestors, leaving behind a kingdom that would soon flourish under Solomon's wise and peaceful rule. Bathsheba, now Queen Mother, stood by Solomon's side. Her journey from a young woman caught in a difficult situation to a respected queen was a testament to grace and strength. She witnessed God's faithfulness through every season of her life. The story of David and Bathsheba is a powerful reminder that even when we make mistakes, forgiveness and renewal are possible. God's love is greater than our failures, and His plans for us are always filled with hope. As you listen now, feel the calm that comes from knowing you are held in a love that never ends. Rest your mind and heart, letting go of worries and fears. Remember, just like David and Bathsheba, your story is still unfolding, full of grace and new beginnings. As the years gracefully moved forward, the story of David and Bathsheba continued to unfold in ways both quiet and profound. David, once a young shepherd boy who had been anointed to lead a nation, now sat as king on the throne of Israel. His heart, though weighted with past mistakes, carried an enduring love for God and a sincere desire to lead his people well. In the soft light of the palace, amid the gentle sounds of servants and children, David often found himself reflecting on the path that had brought him here. The journey had been filled with moments of great triumph as well as deep sorrow. Yet through it all, one truth remained steady: God's mercy never failed. Bathsheba, once a woman whose life had been touched by pain and loss, had become a queen whose wisdom and grace touched many. She was not only the mother of Solomon, the future king, but also an advisor who understood the delicate balance of power, love, and faith within the palace walls. Their son Solomon was growing, beloved and cherished. From a young age, he showed signs of a wise and gentle spirit. David saw in him a promise of hope and renewal. He prayed often that Solomon would grow in wisdom and strength, that he would build the temple and lead Israel in the ways of the Lord. The palace life, while grand, was not without its struggles. The family faced challenges that echoed the consequences of earlier choices. The pain caused by the sins of the past had ripples that touched even the youngest members, yet David's faith never wavered. He continued to pour out his heart to God in songs and prayers, expressing both his regrets and his trust. One of the greatest trials came from within his own family. His son Absalom, though handsome and popular, harbored anger and resentment. This anger grew like a silent storm, threatening to break the peace of the kingdom. The rebellion that Absalom later led brought sorrow to David's heart, but also showed the complex nature of human hearts, how love and pain can live side by side. Despite these storms, David's love for his people and his commitment to God remained his guiding light. He sought wisdom from the Lord, asking for guidance in every decision. His psalms, many written during times of hardship, reflect a heart striving to find peace amidst turmoil. As David's life neared its close, he made careful preparations for Solomon to take his place as king. He reminded Solomon of the promises God had made and the importance of following God's commands with a whole heart. David's blessing was full of hope and faith, a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. Bathsheba stood by Solomon's side, proud and hopeful. She had walked a long and winding road, yet God's faithfulness had been their steady companion. Through forgiveness and grace, her life had been transformed, and through Solomon, the future of Israel shone bright. In all of this, the story of David and Bathsheba reminds us that life is filled with moments of joy and moments of sorrow. We all stumble, yet we are invited to come back to God's loving embrace. Forgiveness is powerful. Healing is possible. New beginnings are real. As you listen to this story, may your heart be soothed and your mind at rest. Know that no matter your own journey, God's mercy is with you. Let the peace of this moment wrap around you like a soft blanket. Allow your thoughts to drift gently, knowing you are safe and loved. As the soft days of the kingdom flowed one into another, David's life continued to unfold with all its complexities, moments of hope and regret, sorrow and joy, peace and turmoil. The story of David and Bathsheba, which had begun with a glance from a rooftop and grown into a profound saga, now moved forward with the quiet dignity of a king who had faced his own humanity and found grace. In the palace halls of Jerusalem, the sounds of daily life mingled gently the footsteps of servants carrying their tasks, the laughter of children playing in the courtyards, the soft murmur of conversations in the cool shadows of olive trees. Yet beneath this calm surface, the weight of history rested heavily in David's heart. David, the shepherd boy, who had once trusted the Lord with all his soul, had been made king by God's hand. He had conquered enemies and united a nation, writing songs that echoed his deep love for God. But he had also fallen into great sin, a fact that he carried with humility and sorrow. Bathsheba, the woman who had once been the wife of Uriah the Hittite, was now queen and mother to Solomon, a boy who represented the promise of a brighter future. As David looked upon Solomon, his heart was filled with both joy and hope. He saw in him the light of God's mercy, a chance to rebuild and restore what had been broken. Solomon's gentle spirit and quiet wisdom were already apparent, even in his youth. David prayed often that Solomon would grow in strength and understanding, prepared to lead the people of Israel into a new era of peace and prosperity. But the story of a family, especially one touched by the trials of kingship, is rarely without difficulty. David's household was marked by struggles that echoed the consequences of earlier mistakes. The pain of loss, betrayal, and rebellion often made its presence known in quiet, unsettling ways. One such shadow was cast by Absalom, David's son, a young man whose charm and beauty captured the hearts of many, but whose spirit was troubled by anger and hurt. The story of Absalom's rebellion is one of heartbreak, a son rising against his father, bringing conflict into the very home that should have been a place of love. David's sorrow over Absalom was deep and real. Though Absalom's actions caused great pain, David's love for him never faded. The king's psalms, filled with longing and grief, reflect the tender heart of a father who mourned the brokenness within his own family. Even in the midst of rebellion and strife, David continued to seek God's guidance and forgiveness. Amid these family challenges, David's faith remained his anchor. He sought the Lord with all his heart, finding solace in prayer and song. His psalms reveal a man who knew the depths of human weakness, but also the heights of divine mercy. David's relationship with God was not perfect, but it was real, full of honest confession, repentance, and trust. Bathsheba, as Queen Mother, played an important role in the later years of David's life. She stood as a steady presence beside Solomon, encouraging him in wisdom and faith. Her journey from the pain of loss to a position of honor and influence was a testament to God's grace and healing power. As David's health began to wane, he turned his thoughts toward the future of the kingdom. He gathered his sons and gave them his final counsel. To Solomon, he spoke with love and hope, urging him to be strong and to walk faithfully with God. David's blessing was a quiet prayer for wisdom and courage, a charge to build the temple and to lead Israel with justice and mercy. The transition from David to Solomon marked a new chapter for Israel, one filled with promise and divine blessing. Solomon's reign would bring peace and prosperity, fulfilling the hopes that had been kindled through years of trial and forgiveness. Reflecting on the story of David and Bathsheba, we see a tapestry woven with threads of light and shadow. It reminds us that life is rarely simple or perfect. Even the greatest among us are human, capable of mistakes and in need of grace. The story teaches us about the power of forgiveness, the possibility of redemption, and the unending love of God. As you rest now, let these truths settle gently within your heart. Allow the peaceful rhythm of this story to soothe your mind and spirit. Know that no matter where you are on your journey, you are embraced by grace and surrounded by love. Let the quiet comfort of this moment fill you, wrapping around you like a soft, warm blanket. Feel yourself drifting deeper into calm and rest, carried on the gentle current of faith and hope. And as the story continues, so too does the promise of renewal and peace. In the tranquil stillness of Jerusalem, The city's ancient stones glowed softly beneath the tender light of dawn. The gentle breeze carried the scent of olive trees and blooming flowers through the palace gardens, weaving a quiet peace that settled over the kingdom. Within the walls of his palace, King David sat quietly, his thoughts deep and his heart full of memories. His life had been a tapestry of moments, some bright with victory and joy, others shadowed by sorrow and regret. Yet through all, the steadfast love of God had been his constant companion. The story of David and Bathsheba, once marked by great turmoil and heartache, had grown into a narrative of forgiveness, healing, and hope. Bathsheba, now the Queen Mother, moved gracefully through the halls. She carried the dignity of her position with quiet strength, tempered by the knowledge of the hardships she had endured. The memory of her first husband, Uriah, was never far from her thoughts, a solemn reminder of the cost of sin and the depths of God's mercy. Their son, Solomon, was blossoming into a young man of wisdom and promise. Even as a boy, he showed signs of the wise ruler he would become: patient, thoughtful, and filled with a desire to honor God. David often watched him with a father's pride and a hopeful heart. In Solomon, the future of Israel seemed bright, a shining light born from the darkness of past mistakes. Yet the peace of the kingdom was not without its challenges. Within the royal family, tensions simmered quietly. Absalom, David's son from another wife, nursed a deep anger. His rebellion was not simply a political act. It was a cry from a wounded heart. The pain of family divisions echoed through the halls, a reminder that even kings are not immune to the trials of human relationships. David's love for his sons was vast, but his heart was often heavy with grief. The psalms he composed during these times reveal a man wrestling with sorrow, longing for peace, and seeking forgiveness. His prayers were raw and honest, a mirror to the struggles and hopes that filled his soul. Through it all, David remained a man of faith. His trust in God was the anchor that held him steady when the storms of life threatened to overwhelm. He sought guidance and grace, leaning on the Lord's promises and finding comfort in his presence. As David's life neared its close, he gathered his family for one final counsel. His voice was gentle but firm as he spoke to Solomon, charging him to be strong and wise, to walk faithfully with God, and to lead the people with justice and mercy. The king's blessing was a heartfelt prayer, a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. Bathsheba stood beside Solomon, her heart full of hope and faith. Her journey had been long and difficult, but God's faithfulness had been her strength. She had witnessed the power of forgiveness and the possibility of new beginnings. The transition from David to Solomon marked not just a change of rulers, but the beginning of a new chapter for Israel. Solomon's reign would be known for wisdom and peace, a fulfillment of the promises made to David years before. As you listen now, allow the quiet strength of this story to soothe your spirit. Imagine the soft light of dawn touching the ancient city, the gentle rustle of olive branches, and the peaceful presence of a king who found grace in the midst of human imperfection. Let your mind drift gently with the rhythm of the words. Feel the calm settle in your heart as you rest in the knowledge of forgiveness and hope. Know that no matter where you are in life, You are held in a love that is deeper than any mistake. May this story, full of lessons and grace, carry you into a place of peaceful rest and gentle dreams. The sun rose slowly over the hills surrounding Jerusalem, bathing the city in a gentle golden light that spilled softly through the narrow streets and into the palace chambers. The air was warm but tempered by a cool morning breeze that rustled the olive trees, carrying with it a scent both fresh and ancient. In this tranquil setting, King David sat in quiet contemplation, his mind filled with memories of the past and hopes for the future. Life had not been easy for David, nor had it been simple. His path had been marked by triumphs that lifted his people and challenges that tested his soul. Among those challenges, the story of Bathsheba had become a defining chapter, one filled with sorrow, repentance, forgiveness, and grace. Bathsheba, the Queen Mother, walked softly through the palace gardens. Her presence was serene and composed, a testament to the resilience that had grown in her heart. Once a woman caught in the tides of fate, she now stood as a pillar of strength and wisdom. Her journey had been shaped by loss, love, and the mercy of God. Her son Solomon, who had grown from a child into a young man, was a reflection of that mercy. His eyes held the spark of wisdom, and his demeanor radiated a calm assurance that belied his youth. David's heart swelled with pride and hope whenever he looked at Solomon, seeing in him the promise of a kingdom restored and a future secured. Yet even as peace settled softly over the palace, shadows lingered in the corners of David's family. The rebellion of Absalom was a wound that refused to heal quickly. Absalom's betrayal was not merely political. It was deeply personal, a fracture in the heart of a family and a kingdom. David's grief over his son's choices was profound, and the pain echoed in the psalms he wrote in the quiet hours of the night. Despite the turmoil, David's faith remained unshaken. He leaned into the promises of God, seeking solace in prayer and song. His psalms were full of heartfelt confession, lament, and unwavering trust. In them, he revealed a man who knew the depths of human failure, but also the heights of divine forgiveness. The kingdom itself was changing. The people of Israel, inspired by David's leadership and now looking towards Solomon's reign, felt a cautious optimism. The promise of a temple, a holy place to honor God, stirred their hearts with hope. It was a dream that had been whispered for years, now becoming a reality. David's final days were marked by a sense of quiet preparation. He gathered his sons and advisors, speaking words of wisdom and encouragement. To Solomon, he imparted the sacred charge to build the temple and to govern with justice and mercy. David's blessing was heartfelt and profound, an invocation of God's guidance for the young king. Bathsheba, standing by Solomon's side, embodied the grace of redemption. Her life was a living testimony to the power of forgiveness and the possibility of renewal. Through her, the story of David and Bathsheba came full circle from a moment of temptation and sin to a legacy of hope and faith. As you listen, imagine the soft morning light filling the palace, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the quiet strength of a family bound together by love and grace. Let your mind and heart be soothed by the timeless truths in this story. Know that no matter the shadows you face, forgiveness and healing are always within reach. Allow yourself to rest now in this peaceful moment, carried gently by the rhythm of the words and the calm presence of faith. Let your thoughts drift slowly like clouds moving across a tranquil sky. Feel the comfort of being held by a love that never fades, a mercy that never ends. And so the story continues, unfolding with the promise of new beginnings and the quiet power of grace. The city of Jerusalem buzzed softly beneath the glow of early morning, its stone streets slowly stirring to life. Traders opened their stalls. The scent of fresh bread drifted from ovens, and the distant calls of shepherds echoed from the hills. Yet within the walls of the palace, the air was thick with quiet anticipation. Something was stirring a moment that would shape the fate of a kingdom. David, the aging king, sat upon his throne, his eyes reflecting a mix of wisdom, regret, and hope. Though his years had tempered his strength, his mind remained sharp, and his heart beat fiercely with the love of his people and the weight of his responsibilities. The story of Bathsheba, once a private sorrow, had become part of the very fabric of Israel's history. But now, new challenges approached like shadows lengthening at sunset. Absalom's rebellion had grown from whispers in dark corners to open defiance, threatening to tear the kingdom apart. The son who had once been a beloved prince was now a rival, gathering followers and plotting to seize the throne. David's heart ached with the knowledge that this conflict was not just about power, but about a fractured family. The betrayal cut deeper than any sword, leaving wounds that only time and grace could heal. Yet amid the turmoil, a stirring of hope emerged. Solomon, David's son with Bathsheba, was coming of age, his wisdom shining like a beacon in uncertain times. The young prince carried with him the promise of peace, a future where the kingdom might be reunited and restored. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky with hues of gold and crimson, David called his trusted advisors and sons to a quiet council. The weight of the coming conflict pressed upon them, but so did the hope for resolution and healing. David spoke with calm authority, urging his sons to remember the covenant with God and to seek peace above all else. He charged Solomon with the task of building the temple, a sacred place where God's presence would dwell among his people forever. This temple was more than stone and timber. It was a symbol of faith, unity, and renewal. The tension in the room was palpable, but so was the resolve. David's words were a balm, reminding all present that even in the darkest moments, God's hand was at work. As night settled over Jerusalem, David retired to his chambers, his mind heavy yet hopeful. The city below was alive with whispers and plans, but the king's heart remained fixed on God's promises. The days that followed were filled with preparations, soldiers readying for possible battle, Solomon learning the ways of leadership, and Bathsheba offering counsel with quiet strength. Then came the moment when Absalom's forces marched toward Jerusalem, their banners catching the wind like the shadows of a coming storm. The kingdom held its breath. But David, with faith unwavering, chose to face the challenge not with fear but with trust. He prayed for guidance and strength, knowing that the outcome rested in God's hands. The battle that followed was fierce yet swift. Sons clashed with fathers, friends turned against friends, and the earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of the conflict. Yet through it all, David's prayers were a steady current beneath the chaos, a reminder that even amid strife, peace could be found. Absalom's rebellion was quelled, and the kingdom slowly began to heal. David's love for his people and family remained unbroken, and his faith deeper than ever. As you listen now, imagine the swirling colors of the sunset sky, the steady drum of footsteps on stone, and the quiet prayers whispered in the night. Feel the tension of conflict mingled with the calm assurance of faith. Let your breath slow, your mind soften, and your heart rest in the gentle unfolding of this story. A story of mistakes and mercy, loss and love, conflict and peace. Know that just as David trusted in God through the storms of his life, you too can find calm and hope amid your own challenges. The days that followed the rebellion were filled with quiet rebuilding. Jerusalem's streets, once tense and shadowed by fear, began to brighten again under the warm Sunday. The people of Israel, who had witnessed the strife within their own house, looked to their king and his family for signs of healing and hope. David's heart was heavy but resolute. He knew that the scars of conflict would remain for many years to come. Yet he also knew that the path forward was one of restoration, forgiveness, and faith. The lessons of the past echoed in his mind, the consequences of choices made, the depths of human weakness, and the boundless grace of God's mercy. In the quiet of his chambers, David often reflected on the journey he had traveled from a humble shepherd boy to the King of Israel, from a man who had fallen into great sin to one who had found forgiveness and peace. The story of Bathsheba, intertwined with his own, was a constant reminder of God's redemptive power. Solomon, now stepping more confidently into his role as heir, learned from his father's wisdom and mistakes. David shared with him not only the plans for the temple, but also the importance of ruling with a humble heart and seeking God's guidance in all things. The young prince listened intently, absorbing the weight of responsibility and the promise of blessing. Bathsheba's presence remained steady and wise. As Queen Mother, she became a trusted advisor to Solomon, her experience and grace guiding him through the complexities of leadership. Her life, marked by transformation and healing, served as a living example of God's faithfulness. Though the family had weathered many storms, the kingdom itself began to flourish once more. Trade resumed. Festivals were celebrated with renewed joy, and the people's faith in God and their leaders deepened. The promise of the temple brought a sacred focus, uniting the nation in worship and purpose. Yet beneath the surface, David remained mindful of the fragile nature of peace. He knew that the sword Nathan had spoken of, symbolizing the consequences of sin, had left an indelible mark on his household. The coming years would bring further trials, but also opportunities for growth and redemption. As Solomon prepared to ascend the throne, the kingdom stood on the threshold of a new era. David's final prayers and blessings were filled with hope that Solomon would lead with wisdom, justice, and a heart devoted to God. The legacy of David and Bathsheba was not only a story of human frailty, but also of divine grace that transforms and renews. The quiet moments in the palace were filled with anticipation and peace. The future awaited, shaped by the past but not defined by it. The journey of a king and a queen, their triumphs and their trials, continued to unfold, woven into the fabric of a nation chosen by God. Time moved gently in the palace of Jerusalem. The days grew warmer, and the soft rustle of olive branches in the breeze became a familiar, comforting sound. Life settled into a rhythm marked by both remembrance and renewal. King David, now older and wiser, found himself reflecting more often on the path his life had taken, the many seasons of joy and pain, triumph and sorrow. His heart carried the weight of many lessons learned. The memory of Bathsheba, their early trials, and the consequences of choices made lingered like shadows softened by time. Yet, what shone brightest was the undeniable hand of God, moving through it all, weaving a story of forgiveness and grace that changed not only their lives, but the future of Israel. Solomon, growing in wisdom and stature, walked carefully through the halls of the palace. His days were filled with learning from the sages, from the priests, and from his father. David shared with him stories of faith, leadership, and the importance of humility. He impressed upon Solomon the need to seek God's guidance every day, reminding him that true wisdom comes from the Lord. Bathsheba's influence was steady and nurturing. She guided Solomon not just as a mother, but as a wise counselor, teaching him about honor, faithfulness, and the responsibilities that came with ruling a people chosen by God. The trust between them was deep, built on shared experiences, and the hope for a peaceful future. The vision of the temple grew clearer with each passing day. Plans were drawn, materials gathered, and craftsmen prepared. This sacred building would be a place where God's presence could dwell among his people, a symbol of unity and divine blessing. David, though he would not live to see its completion, invested his heart and resources into this holy endeavor. Meanwhile, the kingdom itself thrived. The people rejoiced in their festivals, gathered in worship, and told stories of the mighty king who had led them through both battle and peace. David's psalms, full of praise and reflection, were sung in every corner, inspiring hearts to trust in God's steadfast love. Yet beneath the surface, the shadows of the past never fully disappeared. Family wounds and lingering regrets reminded David that even kings are human, prone to mistakes and in need of mercy. His prayers were often filled with humble confession and a deep yearning for reconciliation and peace. One quiet evening, as the sun set behind the hills and the stars began to twinkle softly overhead, David felt a gentle peace wash over him. He knew his time was drawing near, but his heart was calm, filled with faith and hope. The journey had been long and winding, marked by both human frailty and divine grace. He gathered his family and advisors for one last time, sharing words of encouragement and wisdom. His voice was tender but sure as he spoke of God's promises, the importance of faith, and the legacy each of them would carry forward. He charged Solomon to be a king who sought God's heart, who ruled with justice and compassion. Bathsheba stood close by, a quiet strength beside her son. Her life had been transformed by love and forgiveness, a testament to the power of God's mercy. She looked toward the future with hope, trusting that Solomon's reign would bring peace and prosperity to the land. As the evening deepened and the palace grew still, David's thoughts turned once more to God, the source of his strength, the anchor of his soul. The story of his life, with all its twists and turns, was a reflection of God's faithfulness, a reminder that no matter our failures, redemption is always within reach. The night embraced the city gently, and with it, a kingdom poised on the edge of a new dawn. The dawn broke softly over Jerusalem, casting a gentle light across the city's ancient stones. The quiet stirrings of a new day filled the air, the song of birds, the faint footsteps of early risers, the slow awakening of a kingdom preparing for what lay ahead. In the palace, a sense of peaceful anticipation settled like a soft blanket. King David, though weary with age, remained a figure of dignity and wisdom. His eyes carried the deep knowledge of a man who had walked through storms and found refuge in God's grace. His thoughts often drifted to the past, the years of youth and battle, the days of joy and heartbreak. The story of Bathsheba, intertwined so closely with his own, was a constant reminder of God's mercy and the power of forgiveness. Solomon, standing on the threshold of his new role, felt the weight of responsibility gently pressing on his shoulders. Yet he was ready, bolstered by the wisdom passed down from his father and the steadfast love of his mother. Bathsheba's quiet counsel had become a guiding light, steady and sure, helping him to prepare for the great task ahead. The plans for the temple had taken shape. Craftsmen and builders were gathering resources, eager to begin a project that would unite the people in worship and praise. This temple was more than a building. It was a symbol of God's covenant with his people, a place where heaven and earth would meet. In the quiet halls of the palace, David shared stories with Solomon not just of kings and battles, but of faith and humility. He spoke of the importance of seeking God's wisdom above all else, of ruling with kindness, justice, and a heart surrendered to the Lord. Bathsheba watched her son with quiet pride, remembering the long journey that had brought them here. From a time of sorrow and loss to a season of hope and promise, her life was a testament to the transforming power of God's love. Though the kingdom was peaceful, David's heart remained mindful of the fragility of life. The lessons of the past were never far from his mind. The cost of sin, the pain of broken relationships, and the constant need for repentance and grace. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the stars began to shimmer faintly in the sky, David called his family together once more. His voice was gentle but filled with authority, as he reminded them of their duty to God and to one another. He blessed Solomon, charging him to lead with wisdom and a humble heart. Bathsheba stood beside her son, a silent pillar of strength. Her faith had carried her through seasons of uncertainty, and now it shone brightly in her hope for Solomon's reign. The night deepened around Jerusalem, wrapping the city in calm and quiet. The story of David and Bathsheba, woven with human frailty, divine forgiveness, and the promise of new beginnings, continued to unfold like a soft melody, timeless and true. The seasons turned gently over Jerusalem, and with each passing day, the kingdom blossomed in ways both seen and unseen. The city's stone streets were alive with activity, yet beneath the surface, a sacred calm endured. The hearts of the people beat in rhythm with a story far greater than any one man, a story of divine promise, human struggle, and the enduring power of grace. King David, now in the twilight of his years, felt the weight of legacy pressing gently upon him. His hands, once strong and steady in battle, now rested more often in prayer and reflection. The memories of his youth, the laughter, the victories, the mistakes, wove themselves together like threads in a vast tapestry. Bathsheba remained a constant presence at his side, her spirit tempered by trials and strengthened by hope. Their shared journey, marked by moments of joy and sorrow, had brought them closer not only to each other but to the God who never abandoned them. One afternoon, David invited Bathsheba to walk with him in the royal gardens, a place where olive trees stretched their branches skyward and fragrant flowers bloomed in quiet corners. The soft rustle of leaves and the gentle hum of bees created a peaceful soundtrack to their conversation. David spoke softly, recounting his hopes for Solomon and the temple that would soon rise in Jerusalem. He shared his heart's desire for the people of Israel to experience a renewed closeness with God, a place where the divine presence would dwell forever. Bathsheba listened attentively, her eyes reflecting both the weight of responsibility and the flicker of joy. She knew that Solomon's path would not be without challenges, yet she believed in the boy's quiet strength and the wisdom God was already shaping within him. Their conversation turned to the future of the kingdom. David expressed his longing for unity and peace, a kingdom healed from the wounds of the past. Bathsheba, with a gentle smile, reminded him that God's hand was always at work, weaving redemption even from brokenness. As they walked, servants moved quietly in the background, preparing for the day's events, gathering scrolls, polishing lamps, and readying spaces for the many visitors who came to seek David's counsel. Later that evening, the palace was filled with a gathering of leaders, priests, and wise men. They came to discuss the plans for the temple and the future of the nation. The air buzzed softly with conversation, ideas flowing as the group considered how best to honor God and build a lasting foundation for worship. David, seated with calm authority, listened and offered guidance. His years of experience were a wellspring of wisdom, and his faith rooted every word. Bathsheba, standing beside him, quietly encouraged those around her with her presence and insight. The night grew deep, and as the assembly dispersed, David and Bathsheba retired to a quieter room, a space filled with books, scrolls, and memories. Here, away from the weight of leadership, they shared moments of tenderness and reflection. David spoke of his regrets, his hopes, and his trust in God's mercy. Bathsheba, with a heart shaped by grace, reminded him of God's forgiveness and the new life that had blossomed from their story. Their love, tested and refined, was a beacon of hope not just for themselves but for the generations that would follow. In the days that followed, Solomon began to take on more responsibilities, learning the art of leadership and the importance of wisdom. Bathsheba's guidance was ever present, a steady light in the sometimes overwhelming duties of governance. David, though growing frail, remained engaged and involved, preparing his son for the throne with stories, prayers, and encouragement. The bond between father and son deepened, built on mutual respect and the shared understanding of God's call. The story of David and Bathsheba, far from ending with moments of sorrow, now blossomed into a narrative of hope, renewal, and divine faithfulness, a story that would echo through the ages. As the warm sun stretched across the rooftops of Jerusalem, painting the palace walls in golden light, the city seemed to hold its breath. Change was coming not in sudden gusts, but in quiet, steady movements guided by unseen hands. The days of David's reign were drawing to a close, and all throughout the kingdom, preparations stirred like the first whisper of wind before the arrival of rain. Inside the palace, Bathsheba moved with grace and quiet purpose. She had long since grown into her role as a queen not only by name but in wisdom and discernment. Her voice, once soft and cautious, now carried a serene authority born from experience. She did not speak often in public, but when she did, even the older advisers paused to listen. Solomon, her son, stood taller now. His bearing was calm and reflective, but behind his thoughtful eyes lay the fire of a mind eager to learn and a heart longing to serve well. Though still young, he had spent many hours by his father's side, listening to stories of war and peace, failure and mercy, glory and repentance. On this particular morning, David had summoned his closest advisers, elders, and commanders to the great hall. The occasion was solemn. Drapes of deep purple hung from the arches. A hush fell over the room as David, dressed in simple linen, stepped forward with Bathsheba at his side and Solomon behind him. The king, his voice weathered but strong, declared his intentions. He would soon rest with his ancestors, and Solomon, his son with Bathsheba, would be king in his place. The announcement was not unexpected, but its formality marked a turning point. David then lifted his hands and blessed Solomon in front of them all. It was not merely a political transfer, it was spiritual, deeply rooted in the covenant God had made with David. His words trembled with emotion, but his eyes were firm. "My son," he said, turning to Solomon with gentleness, "know the God of your father and serve him with wholehearted devotion and a willing mind. For the Lord searches every heart and understands every desire and every thought. If you seek him, he will be found by you." Bathsheba stood still as stone, her hands gently clasped, but within her a storm of emotion stirred. She remembered the woman she had been, the wife who had mourned, the mother who had hoped, the queen who had waited. This moment was not born in ease, it was born in fire. Yet here it was, her son, standing as heir to the throne, blessed before the nation by a king whose heart had returned fully to God. Outside, trumpets sounded. The people gathered in the streets, and the city roared with the news. Solomon, son of David and Bathsheba, would reign. Cheers rose like waves, and music echoed off the stone walls. Incense burned, dancers twirled. The joy of the people swelled through the city like the fragrance of jasmine in bloom. Yet while joy filled the streets, tension brewed quietly in other parts of the kingdom. Not all hearts rejoiced. In hidden corners of the palace, whispers stirred. Some still favored Adonijah, David's older son by another wife, who had once attempted to seize the throne before being stopped. Now, as the days passed, Adonijah's eyes once again turned toward the crown. Though his initial rebellion had been humbled, a seed of ambition still smoldered within him. He knew he could not openly challenge Solomon, but he was cunning, and what he lacked in rightful authority he hoped to gain through subtle strategy. Adonijah approached Bathsheba one morning in the outer court gardens. She stood by a fountain, the water catching the morning light like soft glass. Her gaze was steady when she saw him approach. He bowed low, too low, and spoke with gentle words. "My lady," he said, "you know the kingdom was mine. All Israel expected me to reign, yet it was given to my brother. This is from the Lord. I do not dispute it. But I ask one thing of you: do not refuse me." Bathsheba listened, her expression unreadable. "Speak," she said simply. Adonijah bowed again. "I ask you to speak to Solomon the king, for he will not refuse you. Ask him to give me Abishag the Shunammite as a wife." Bathsheba said she would speak with the king, but her heart stirred uneasily. Abishag, though never David's wife, had cared for the king in his old age and was considered part of his household. For Adonijah to request her was not a mere matter of love. It was a claim, a quiet, clever attempt to strengthen his position and hint at royal rights. Bathsheba, in her wisdom, approached Solomon with dignity. She entered the throne room where her son sat in regal peace, and at once Solomon stood, bowed to his mother, and ordered a throne to be brought for her at his right hand. "My mother," he said, "ask what you wish. I will not refuse you." But when Bathsheba explained Adonijah's request, a great silence fell. Solomon's calm face tightened. His eyes darkened with understanding. The request, though dressed in humility, was an act of political defiance. Adonijah had revealed his true intentions. Solomon rose. "Why do you ask Abishag for Adonijah? You might as well ask for the kingdom itself." And with swift judgment, Solomon sent Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, to carry out justice. Adonijah was struck down, and his silent rebellion ended. Bathsheba said nothing, but she walked slowly from the throne room that day, her heart aching with sorrow and strength mingled. She had known loss before. She had known the pain of watching ambition devour those who could not surrender to the will of God. Yet through it all, her resolve deepened. The palace grew quieter after that. The noise of celebration gave way to focused labor. Solomon, now fully seated on the throne, began organizing the building of the temple. Workers arrived from far places. Cedars came from Lebanon. Stonecutters shaped each block with precision. David, still alive but weakening, spent his days recording psalms and giving final instructions. Bathsheba spent many evenings at his side, reading scripture with him, praying quietly as the lamps flickered in the growing darkness. Their story, so complicated and full of emotion, was nearing its earthly end. But what remained was peace, a peace hard-earned, a peace that came only through repentance, forgiveness, and the gentle unfolding of God's will over time. The halls of the palace had grown quieter in recent weeks. David, once the warrior king whose name stirred songs across the land, now lay resting in the inner chambers of his house. His strength had waned, not from sudden illness, but from the long and wearying years that had passed. The man who had once slain giants and fled through wildernesses, who had danced before the ark of the Lord and wept bitterly for his sins, now spent his days in quiet reflection and prayer. The sounds of the city carried softly into the palace windows. The merchants still called in the market. The children still laughed in the courtyards. The temple's foundation stones were being laid, and the scent of cedar and stone dust drifted in the morning air. All around him, the kingdom continued to move forward, just as it must. Bathsheba remained nearby each day. She no longer dressed in the elaborate robes of ceremony, but in garments simple and dignified, as though honoring the sacredness of this quiet season. She spent her mornings reading from the ancient scrolls of Moses, and her evenings sitting by David's side, holding his hand or speaking in hushed tones. Often, they said very little at all. There was a deep understanding between them now that required no words. Sometimes, Solomon joined them, kneeling beside his father to ask questions. David would place a trembling hand on his son's head and speak with quiet urgency, pouring out what wisdom he could before the time to speak was gone. He spoke of justice, mercy, the fear of the Lord, and the great weight of responsibility that came with wearing a crown. One evening the room was lit by oil lamps casting soft shadows on the walls. David had asked for the curtains to be drawn open so he could see the stars. He looked toward the heavens, remembering the promise God had given him that from his line would come a kingdom that would never end. He turned to Bathsheba, his voice low and tired. "Do you remember the night I first saw you?" he asked gently. She nodded, her heart stirring. "I do," she whispered. David's eyes did not look away. "I was not the man I should have been that night. I was foolish and blind. But God did not leave me. Even in my sin, He came to find me. He sent Nathan, not to destroy me, but to save me." Bathsheba reached for his hand. "We were broken," she said, "but He built something new from the ashes." David smiled faintly. "You are stronger than I ever imagined, Bathsheba, and you have raised a son who will honor the Lord." Tears gathered in her eyes. She had waited so long for words like these, not words of romance, but of recognition, of healing. She had once been a young woman carried by grief. Now, she was a mother, a queen, a pillar in the history of God's people. That night, David slept deeply, more peacefully than he had in many days. And in the days that followed, he began to prepare for his departure in earnest. He called for the priests and the Levites. He instructed them on the service of the temple. He gave detailed plans for its construction, for the divisions of the musicians and gatekeepers, for the treasuries and the courts. Every part had been shown to him by the Spirit of God, and now he passed it all to Solomon. Then, in the presence of all Israel's leaders and the army's captains, David rose for one final address. Though his body trembled, his voice rang clear in the open court. "Hear me, my brethren and my people," he said. "I had it in my heart to build a house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord. But God said to me, 'You shall not build a house for my name, because you have been a man of war.' Yet he chose me to be king over Israel forever. And now he has chosen Solomon my son to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord." He turned to Solomon then, and the crowd grew silent. "My son, know the God of your father. Serve him with a loyal heart and a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands every intent. If you seek him, he will be found by you. Be strong and do it." Then the people gave praise to God. They offered sacrifices with joyful hearts, and the land rang with music and worship. It was a moment of peace and unity, rare and precious. The years of war and division had been many, but now the people rejoiced. Bathsheba stood among the women of the court, her eyes fixed on her son. She had watched him grow from a boy into a man, and now he was king not merely by lineage, but by divine appointment. She remembered the anguish she had felt after the death of her first child. She remembered the ache that had threatened to undo her. And now here she stood, witness to something only God could have made possible. David lived for a short while longer, but his time drew near. In his last days he whispered psalms of worship. He spoke of the Lord as his shepherd, his rock, his fortress. He spoke of mercy and salvation, of the God who had raised him from the sheepfold to the throne. And then, in the quiet of a morning, with the sun rising slowly over the hills of Jerusalem, David passed from this life into the arms of his Creator. There was no sound in the chamber, only the soft rustle of wind through the curtains and the flickering of the last lamp's flame. The kingdom mourned. The people wore sackcloth, and the priests wept in the temple courts. Solomon wept openly, his grief raw and honest. Bathsheba sat beside him, her strength like a shield. Together they buried David in the city of David. Songs were sung of his courage, of his love for the Lord, of his failings and forgiveness. He had not been perfect, but he had been chosen. And in the lineage of his house, the hope of the world would one day come. As the days moved forward, Solomon began his reign with reverence. He walked quietly through the halls his father had once walked, and he prayed often. He asked not for riches or revenge, but for wisdom to govern well. Bathsheba, now the queen mother, advised him with discretion and love. She did not meddle in matters of rule, but her presence was deeply respected. Her story, once whispered in shame, had become a testimony of redemption. And though the palace would change, and kings would rise and fall, her legacy remained. For from the line of David and Bathsheba would come another son, one born not in a palace but in a manger, one who would also be called a king, one who would carry the weight of all sin and offer mercy beyond measure. But for now, in the golden light of early morning, Bathsheba walked through the gardens in peace. The olive trees swayed gently above her. The scent of myrrh and rosemary drifted on the breeze, and in her heart there was quiet. a quiet earned through fire, but made beautiful by the hand of God. The days after David's passing moved slowly, like golden lights spilling through high windows. The palace remained quiet for a time, its courtyards bathed in silence as the nation mourned its beloved king. But in the hush of those early mornings and still evenings, the air felt full of something sacred. The end of one chapter had come, but another had begun. Solomon now sat on the throne. He was no longer the boy who ran through the palace gardens, chasing sparrows and learning his letters. He had become a man, robed in deep indigo, with eyes that held both youthful kindness and the steady weight of wisdom growing day by day. The crown on his brow was not only gold, but promise. A promise that his reign would be one of peace, unlike the wars that had shaped his father's life. And by his side, though often unseen by the court's many eyes, was Bathsheba. She did not seek attention, nor did she command the chambers with loud commands or displays of power. But all knew that the Queen Mother held a quiet and graceful influence. She walked slowly through the royal halls, her veil light like a whisper over her hair, her hands often folded in thought. When she spoke, her words were few but chosen with care. When she looked upon Solomon, there was something in her eyes that stirred respect in even the boldest of advisers. In her private quarters, now adorned with soft linens and fragrant myrtle branches, Bathsheba kept the scrolls of the law close. She read them by the soft glow of lamp oil, her heart steady as she remembered every moment that had brought her here. The pain, the loss, the forgiveness, the mercy. Every turn of her story was written not only on paper but in her soul. One morning she rose early and went out to the palace balcony. The sky was still lavender, the stars only beginning to fade. The hills beyond Jerusalem were bathed in cool mist, and the birds had not yet begun their songs. It was a sacred hour. She stood quietly, listening to the breath of the land, the stillness of a kingdom at peace. Behind her, Solomon approached softly. He wore a simple tunic and no crown. To her, he would always be her son before he was her king. "Mother," he said gently. She turned with a smile. "You are up early." "I could not sleep," he admitted. "My thoughts are full." He leaned on the stone railing beside her. The breeze tugged softly at his dark hair. Bathsheba looked at him. "Tell me." He hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "There are many voices in the court now. Some tell me to build stronger armies. Others want to tax the people more. Some whisper that I should marry for alliances. They say a king must be feared to keep peace." "And what do you say?" she asked. He was quiet for a while. "I only want to do what is right in the eyes of the Lord." I asked him for wisdom, not riches or power. I do not want to forget that. Bathsheba reached for his hand. "Then you are already wiser than many who have ruled." He smiled gently, comforted by her presence. "You always remind me of what matters." She looked out over the hills again. "Do you remember when you were a little boy, and you asked why the sky changes color at evening?" He laughed softly. "I thought God painted it for each person." "Maybe he does, she said with a twinkle in her eye. There was a long, comfortable silence between them, the kind that only years of shared pain and joy can create. A silence that held love, respect, and peace. Later that day, Bathsheba walked through the city's outer courtyards. The people greeted her with low bows and warm glances. Children giggled and pointed, calling her Mother of the King. She smiled at them, laying a hand on one small boy's head as he passed. She visited the workers preparing stones for the temple. The sound of chisels and hammers echoed across the land. The great structure David had dreamed of was finally rising, not by his hand, but through his son, just as the Lord had said. Bathsheba stood for a while, watching the laborers carefully place each stone. She thought of how her own life had been reshaped by God's hand. Not removed from suffering, but made whole through it. The temple would be glorious when finished, with golden doors, walls of cedar, and the Ark of the Covenant resting within its innermost place. But in her heart, Bathsheba knew the Lord's presence did not depend on gold or stone. He had walked with her through the darkest valleys. He had stayed near when others turned away. His mercy had not only forgiven her, but lifted her up. That night, Bathsheba returned to her chamber. A letter had arrived from a prophet of the Lord, reminding Solomon of his calling. She read it aloud to herself in a soft voice, the words bringing peace to her heart. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows across the delicate patterns carved in the wooden walls. Before she slept, she knelt on the woven rug near her bed. She whispered a prayer not only for her son, but for all the people of Israel, for the widows and the poor, for the shepherds in the hills, for the children learning to read the sacred scrolls, for every soul who would one day walk the temple steps in search of God's presence. And as she laid her head down to rest, a breeze moved gently through the room. It carried with it the scent of lilies and the hush of the night. Outside, the moon rose high and full, and inside, peace remained like a gentle river flowing through her heart. Bathsheba did not know what her future would hold. She did not know how long her days would be, but she had learned to trust the one who had brought her through sorrow into hope. And now she rested in that trust, quiet and unshaken. Her life had once been shaped by pain, but now it was shaped by peace. And that peace would flow through generations, until the world would one day see another son, one far greater than Solomon, who would walk among the people, full of grace and truth, healing every wound, and offering peace not just to a nation, but to the whole world. But for now, in the heart of Jerusalem, the Queen Mother slept, while the kingdom stood bathed in the stillness of the stars. And so, the story of David and Bathsheba comes to a quiet close, not as a tale of perfection, but as a journey of grace. It is a story that began in weakness, moved through sorrow, and blossomed into something greater than either of them could have imagined. It is the story of a man and a woman flawed, human, honest, and a God who never turned away. A God who saw every step, every tear, every failure, and still brought beauty out of pain. David, the shepherd who became king. Bathsheba, the woman who walked through heartbreak and was lifted in dignity. Together, Their lives became part of something much larger than themselves. Their son Solomon would rise to rule with wisdom. A temple would be built. And generations later, from their very line, would come the promise of salvation to the whole world. This is not only their story, it is ours too. A reminder that no mistake is too deep for mercy, no sorrow too great for hope, and no life too broken for God to heal. So wherever you are listening from, may your heart feel at rest now. May you know that your story matters. And just like David and Bathsheba, you are never beyond the reach of grace. Thank you for being here. You are deeply loved. Good night.